It's Thursday, October 14th, 2024. This is Ashton, Ellett, here with another installment of the Senate Staff Oral History Project, sponsored by the Richard B. Russell Library for Political Research and Studies. I'm here today in the Bob Shore Oral History Studio on the campus of University of Georgia with Rachel McLocklin Santos. A native of Statham, Georgia, she received her bachelor's degree in agricultural and applied economics from the University of Georgia. After stints as an intern and staff assistant for the Senate Agricultural Committee, she joined the personal staff of Senator Saxby Chambliss as a legislative correspondent and later legislative assistant. Following Senator Chambliss's retirement in 2015, she continued in the same role in Senator David Perdue's office before joining the professional staff of the Senate Appropriation Committee's Agriculture, Rural Development, Food and Drug Administration Subcommittee. She stepped away from the Senate in fall 2017 when she became the Director of Policy, Government and Corporate Affairs and later Chief of Staff at the University of Georgia's College of Agricultural and Environmental Sciences. In September 2020, President Donald Trump appointed her State Executive Director of the USDA Farm Service Agency in Georgia, where she was responsible for managing the FSA offices and administering that agency's federal programs throughout the state. She's currently Director of Sales and Industry Relations at Premium Peanut, a grower-owned peanut sheller, oil, and seed company based in Douglas, Georgia. And I'm sure she brought enough samples for everybody. So thank you, Rachel, for taking the time to sit and do this Senate Staff Oral History Project.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start at the beginning. Tell me a little bit about growing up in Barrow County, just down the road.
So I grew up in Barrow County, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up on a beef cattle farm, and I grew up on, we are now a Centennial Farm in Georgia. The farm that I grew up on has been in our family since 1900, and we still actually have cattle there today, and my brother and my dad both farm still. It was really incredible to grow up in agriculture, and while both my dad and my mom had jobs off the farm, such a big part of our life was the cattle. And, I can remember from elementary school, I had chores and different things to do, bottle feed, orphan calves before school. But, in middle school, I was given responsibility over a whole herd, and every day after school, I had to come home and check them and count them and make sure everyone was healthy. And so it instilled a lot of strong work ethic and a lot of different things growing up in a rural area like that. So it was really incredible way to grow up. I actually, always knew that I wanted to come to the University of Georgia. And so that was really where
Were your parents alums?
They were both alums. So they actually met on South Campus.
Okay.
It was what was it called? Ag Hill Council.
Mm-hmm.
And they were both on that, and they met in the conference room of Connor Hall, actually.
How romantic.
I know, right? And so my dad ended up going to law school. He has a degree. My mom has a degree from the College of Family and Consumer Sciences. Mm-hmm. And my dad has a degree from the College of Ag. And he ended up going to law school here as well. And so, he does, the passion for agriculture runs deep with me.
Well, tell me, did your parents grow up, did you grow up in a household that was really politically active or attuned to politics, or was that something that came later?
We always talked about it. I definitely was exposed to it. I even remember, I guess it was elementary school, and I don't exactly remember which presidential election it was, but I remember, us talking about it at school, having kind of a mock election in elementary school, and then us coming home and talking about it. And it was always just something that my parents kind of instilled in me, that civic duty, taking me to vote, doing different things, engaged in my community. It was definitely part of my upbringing.
Now, were you active in politics or other activities while you were on campus at UGA?
I will say I definitely phone banked for Senator Chambliss during his runoff when I was in college. I do remember that. I was really involved in
2000,
SGA.
2008.
Yes.
Yeah, Jim
yes,
Martin.
Yes.
I remember that. That was my first election in Georgia as a grad student. I
That
remember
was that was a wild one
that was, yeah, right.
for that time.
Oh, a very good disclaimer on that. Yes, yes.
But no, I was really involved in SGA, if you count that at all.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So it was a lot
The
of
backbone
fun.
of Georgia politics, SGA, Interfraternity Council, paying out.
Yeah. So SGA was such a big part of my time on campus, and I was a senator for the College of Ag, and we ran our New Deal party, and
I remember the posters. Yes, okay.
yes. So that was a big part of my time here.
Was that before or after Houston?
Before.
That was before. Okay.
Right before. But yes.
Okay. Yes, I remember the New Deal party. I don't remember.
Katie Barlow and Cameron Secord.
That's right. That's right.
Joe Shadoin, all the.
Tells you it was a memorable campaign.
It was.
I remember it.
Well, and what I think was we were so proud of at that point in time, which I think it might have, well, I know it changed soon after we left, but, we really campaigned on, we wanted to get control of the student activity fees money back. And, I was put on that committee to steward that money once we won. And, sat through all of the different student groups on campus coming through making their pitch for their, budget requests. And so we were really proud of that because that had been, it had been decades since SGA had that responsibility. And so we were really, really proud of that. But I think things have changed since.
Wow. That's another conversation. So tell me about getting from Athens, Georgia to Washington. You're an ag major, ag economics. What convinced you that you wanted to go up and try your hand at politics, or I guess government? Really?
Yeah, so I actually came to UGA thinking that I wanted to be a large animal veterinarian. And after my first year here, I decided, that was not necessarily the path that I wanted. While I still loved that space, I decided, maybe I'll do what my dad did, and I'll get an ag economics degree and I'll go to law school. And that was kind of, what I had planned. And so what I ended up doing was learning about the Congressional Ag Fellowship that the College of Ag has, which, I think is it needs to be one of Saxby Chambliss's legacies, and he needs to get so much credit for starting that, because I will say that program is the envy of so many states and universities across the country, and so many states have looked to our program in Washington, D.C., and said, wow, how can we recreate this? I can think of several big universities around the country that have come to us and said, how did you do this? How did you set it up, et cetera? But no one has been able to really have what we have.
Sort of foreshadowing a later part in your career.
Yes, yes. And so, I was so fortunate to be able, in the summer of 2009, to be selected to be Senator Chambliss's Congressional Ag Fellow from the College of Ag. And what I think was so exciting about that program is, rather than just being one of their typical summer interns, which is like a 4 to 6 week intern, and you just, you answer the phones, you stock the drink fridge, and you give Capitol tours.
Get the Georgia peanut
That's
bags.
Right. That's right. You are able to be there for a full 3 months and really be working with staff on a more intimate level and learning things and doing things. So I'll never forget, my parents came and picked me up at the end of the summer, and I said, just prepare yourself, because whether I have a job or not, after I graduate, I'm moving back. And so, and that, at that point in time, Senator Chambliss was ranking member on the Senate Ag Committee. So I was able to do my whole internship on the Ag Committee with his committee staff. And so that was really incredible. So I actually was fortunate to get a call from the staff director. It was actually spring break of my senior year, and she said, would you like a job? If you want to move back up here, I'll hire you. And so I moved back up as soon as I graduated. And was able to start as a staff assistant on the Senate Ag Committee for Senator Chambliss, and was essentially the staff director's assistant, and did all the legislative correspondence work for all of the ag stuff for Saxby, and then a little bit of everything, to be quite honest, because soon after I got there, we learned that he was going to become vice chair of the Senate Intel Committee.
Right.
So, I had the responsibility of trying to figure out how to archive all the files of the, doing all sorts of things that I'd never done before. So it was a learning experience.
The Center for Legislative Archives became your friend, I'm sure.
Yes.
And we can all look at that stuff in 50 years when it's open. So you report to the staff director in this position. How much interaction did you have with the minority professional staff? The Democrats on the committee. How
So
did
we were in the minority at that point in time. That's
right. It
2010.
wasn't until 2014. That's right.
Yes.
That's right. So how did that work? And then I guess how did it? Well, you would have been on personal staff at that point.
So, let's see, I came in end of May, early June of 2010 is when I started.
Right. Okay.
And then I'll never forget, Martha Scott Poindexter pulled me and Ben Mosley in and said, I have some news. Senator Chambliss is going to be vice chair of the Intelligence Committee. All of us are going away. But I've already negotiated your spot in the personal office. And so we were very, very fortunate to be able to transition smoothly into the personal office. And that was seamless. And that was in, I guess, around February of 2011. But, overall, when I was on the committee staff, at that point in time, we worked really, really well with the majority staff. I mean, it was more regional issues within the ag space typically. Now I think things are a bit more political and divisive now, but then it really was around more regional disputes. Now there were always certain issues that would be more kind of majority minority, but it was definitely more amicable, and we worked well.
So when you made that transition over to the personal staff, you became a legislative correspondent.
Well, it was actually but it was still both. So I actually, when I came in, they wanted me to put in my time in the front office and learn that. So, but I did all the legislative correspondence work as well. So
Okay.
I can't remember how long I spent in the front office answering phones in addition to my legislative correspondence duties. But that was an adventure.
Oh yeah?
And I learned a lot, and that taught me a lot of skills, being able to navigate, antagonistic phone calls and various things.
I was going to ask, who musters the energy or the desire to pick up a phone and call a senator's office?
Before I worked in that job, that was so foreign to me. Never in my life did I think, oh, I'm angry about something, I'm going to pick up pick up the phone and call my elected representative's office. So there's a wide range of people, to be quite honest. And it went, from really, truly kind of the unstable people who would call almost every day, to people who were really concerned about one issue, or just the people who were given a number and said, hey, we need you, your numbers, if there was some big issue that was hot at that moment. I had transitioned to the back of the personal office, out of the front office, as a full-time LC at the time of Gang of Six. And I remember, the phones were just melting in the front office. So I missed a good portion of a lot
Between
of the
the
hard
Gang
things.
of Six and the fiscal cliff, that would have been sort of the waning days of Saxby's time.
Yes.
Not to dredge things up. But okay, so what? I assume you worked on ag issues.
Always.
So you were always ag specific.
Always.
And what sort of issues? Yeah, obviously there were one-offs and things like that. But what were the issues that primarily you would have dealt with as a Senate staffer?
So, during, and I guess you're asking over the course of my
Yeah,
time with him.
right, right.
So I went through the end of his, until the very end. And so I did kind of the staff assistant, LC, and I was LA. And I would say Farm Bill was really the big thing while I was there
Sure.
in the ag space. So right when I came in 2010, they had unanimously passed like Healthy Hunger Free Kids, the reauthorization of child nutrition, which was huge. Senator Chambliss played such an instrumental role as ranking member of the Ag Committee in the authoring and getting that across the finish line in a bipartisan way. And that was such a historic piece of legislation for the funding and all of those things. So that that had already really happened. Dodd-Frank was still a really big topic in the Ag Committee space because Dodd-Frank happened, and then all the things that were happening as a result of Dodd-Frank. So it always was going on in the background.
Would that have involved things like the farmers' home insurance, or loans and things like? Is that how Dodd-Frank?
That would not. So
Okay.
it was more of swaps and derivatives and the CFTC and. Senator Chambliss was really, really heavily engaged in that space, so that was why. The CFTC was under the jurisdiction of the Ag Committee, so that was why it was always kind of a part of that. But really, when kind of end of 2011, 2012, Farm Bill started gearing back up, and so Farm Bill was such a huge part. We actually did like 3 rounds of the 2014 Farm Bill, which was crazy. And it drug on forever. Outside of Farm Bill, which we can probably get more in depth on, there was everything from, like water wars and port issues that impact agriculture. There were things like, he was such a big advocate for the hunger community on the Republican side. And so, everyone always came to us when there were needs and things where we needed to engage in that space, in the nutrition and hunger space. There was just a little bit, you name it, we probably touched it during those 4.5 years I was with him, especially, whether it be implementation of FSMA.
FSMA?
Yeah, Food Safety Modernization Act.
Okay.
And because that had happened prior to me, joining the staff, but the implementation of it was definitely, and it was, or it happened right as I was joining. It might have been right in that kind of cusp. But the implementation of the regulations as a result of legislation was always something that we were constantly engaged in interacting with the administration on. Healthy Hunger Free Kids obviously had tons of regulations that happened as a result of it. So always monitoring kind of that oversight arm as our membership on the committee went. But Farm Bill was really the big one.
Right. So, and how did explain to anybody listening or watching the difference between a legislative correspondent and a legislative assistant?
Okay, so kind of the progression typically in an office, as it would normally happen if you came in as a staff assistant. Staff assistant, you would be doing kind of what you would expect, answering phones, running errands, etc. Legislative correspondents really handled everything regarding constituent services, as far as answering emails, answering phone calls, if it was specific on an issue.
Yeah.
My portfolio under Senator Chambliss, it include kind of all the things that really fell under the Ag Committee jurisdiction. So once again, nutrition, hunger, natural resources, ag, obviously,
Right.
And kind of all the things that touch that peripherally. And so the answering hard mail, it was, and I will take a moment to say, at that time when I was legislative correspondent, it was very overwhelming because, you have no idea the kinds of numbers of pieces of mail and emails and phone calls on specific issues that these offices receive, especially an office that covers a whole state and you're getting all of it. And so I was very overwhelmed, and, we had really strict rules in our office about turnaround time because our chief of staff, Charlie Harmon, said, we want a, 6 or 7 day turnaround. I mean, those constituents need a response, and they deserve a response, on a timely and a really thorough response, et cetera. And so at the time, it was always very overwhelming for all of the LCs. And now I will say I commend him so much for really establishing that constituent first mindset, and that we were obviously serving the people of Georgia, but it's the constituent services arm is sometimes something a lot of people don't think about, and it's so critical to a really well functioning office. There's so much that goes on within a Senate office that a lot of people really don't think about, whether it be the casework that goes on helping people navigate their issues with the VA or with the IRS or whatever, you name it, the case officers that help with that, and the legislative correspondents who are trying to ensure that every constituent feels like their voice was heard and that they feel responded to. So it's kind of a thankless job. It feels like at the time, but it's so important. And I commend Charlie Harmon for just, always beating us about constituent services, because it really, I didn't appreciate it when I was, 23, but now I think I realize how important it was and how it made us look to the constituents in Georgia.
Well, how did it work if somebody, in communicating constituent issues from the state level, where you have sort of your regional reps here in the state, how did those concerns get passed up the chain from maybe here in Georgia up to Washington?
So the people who worked for Senator Chambliss, you're saying?
Yeah.
I mean, really, we all had such good relationships. They would just call and we would handle it, or if we would assist if necessary.
Okay.
It was all just phone calls a lot of times.
Right. Okay. Well, so from legislative correspondent to legislative assistant, that's actually working on, like you said, the legislation,
Yes.
the bills, the markups, and how does that work then with the ag committee, the personal staff and
That's a
the
good
committee
question.
staff?
So, it really, I think it varies from office to office, and
Okay.
the relationship of that member with the committee and the chair or ranking member a lot of times. But I would say with what Senator Chambliss had done, in the past, and, with his position, even when he was not ranking member on the Ag Committee, me as an LA, handling agricultural issues during the Farm Bill, I worked very closely with committee staff on the issues that really were important to Senator Chambliss. So they would come to us if something was happening, or if they were hearing something, or if the other side, if our ranking member staff said, the majority is asking for this, and we know this is important to your boss, we need to run this past you and work with you on this to navigate. So obviously a lot of the heavy lifting on big, omnibus type of pieces
Yeah.
of legislation are really done by committee staff in a lot of ways, but that not in a silo. They're working with those members, and they know where their important and hot issues are that they care about.
How much interaction did you have with Senator Isaacson's office and his staff on obviously different committee assignments and things like that, but how much interaction did you have there?
A lot.
Okay.
I would say, I think really what we had as a state in Senator Chambliss and Senator Isaacson was so unique, and we were so blessed to have that with their relationship. And obviously they had known each other for decades, and they worked so well together. But so many states, even with members, senators from the same party, no one worked as well as Senator Chambliss and Senator Isaacson together, and we were such a team in the Senate. But I will say, from my perspective, Senator Isaacson always looked to us for what Senator Chambliss was doing or thinking on agriculture. And so I worked so closely with their legislative assistant, their ag legislative assistant. Everything that was happening, they were reaching out and saying, what are you all thinking? Is this good? Is this not? And we were always constantly talking, which is very unique, truly, in the Senate world. And so we were very, very fortunate. But yeah, and vice versa. If it was something that Senator Isaacson was really more of the expert on, Senator Chambliss and our staff would go to him and his staff and ensure that we were on the same page or understood kind of where they were on an issue. So on agriculture, though, really Senator Chambliss was more of the lead.
Sure. What about you've talked about collaborating at the Senate, within Senate offices or across Senate offices. What about on the House side? With I think it's somebody like Congressman Austin Scott, or somebody who really has a presence in the ag world and legislatively. Was there that sort of interaction as well from Senate and House at all, or were those sort of their own little world?
No, there was, but it was nothing like it was at. And I'm only talking about the time when I was there.
Well, sure.
But, nothing like it was with us in the Senate. But there definitely was. If it was certain people on certain issues, if it was, like you said, a district like Austin Scott's district, and it's, we're talking about Title I commodity programs, he was newer in his tenure during the 14 Farm Bill, so he definitely was communicating.
Or I guess Sanford Bishop would be somebody who'd been there since '92. Somebody more established with more seniority, I suppose.
Yeah, we definitely communicated.
Right. A peanut growing district, if you will.
It very much so
right.
is.
So we're talking 2013, 2014. When did you learn that Senator Chambliss was not going to run for re-election?
Oh, man. I don't remember.
You probably blocked that out.
Yeah, right? I don't remember the date, but I do remember that they called us into a staff meeting in the conference room in Russell and told us. And we were all just...
Were those staff meetings normal, or would that be something unusual, where an all-staff meeting?
An all-staff meeting with him in it was more unusual.
Sure.
And with all of us making sure all of us were there, and so we knew something was going on, but we all understood while we hated it. So.
How would you describe because every office is different, and every office sometimes takes on the character of the member or the chief of staff. How would you describe sort of the day-to-day working atmosphere in Senator Chambliss's office?
It was the greatest.
You don't always hear that.
Yeah. I'll probably get emotional.
Well, that's all right. You want me to?
It's okay. No, I've never experienced, I probably won't ever experience how incredible it was. We were a family.
That is a very sweet thing. And it's empty. I'm going to hit pause right now. Okay, so Senator Chambliss leaves office January 2015, but you stayed behind in D.C. to sort of make that transition from Senator Chambliss's office closing to opening Senator Perdue's office, David Perdue's office. Tell me about that experience.
Yes, so I was able to be hired by Senator Perdue as his Ag LA right at the beginning of his time in the Senate. So I was in his first transitional office in the Dirksen basement, actually, where we had all of the staff in 2 rooms.
The worst basement.
Yes, no sunshine at all.
That's seniority for you.
Right? I learned quickly.
Yeah.
No, but it was really interesting to go from working with someone who knew so much about ag policy, who had 4 farm bills under his belt, to then going to work for someone who really needed to be taught and learn a lot about ag policy. While he knew so much about business and other
Sure.
aspects of the world, ag policy was really foreign to him. So it really gave me the opportunity to educate and do my best to kind of shepherd him along. Now, I was only with him for the first 5 months of his time in the Senate, and I had a job opportunity to go to the Senate Appropriations Committee on the Ag Subcommittee. So he was very gracious and wanted me to have that opportunity and go do that. But yes, so I did. We definitely went through a lot of things, and he had me come in and brief him on a lot of different issues, whether it be...
This is what a farm bill is.
Right. It was everything from that to, food aid programs and understanding, how those things worked, commodity programs, energy programs, all conservation programs, you name it, we would dive into. So he was really, really intrigued and wanted to learn and wanted to be engaged.
How did that opportunity with the subcommittee come up?
It was actually the clerk of that subcommittee actually had formerly worked for Senator Chambliss, and he called me up one day and said, I have a great opportunity, and I actually called Senator Chambliss for his advice, and he said, Rachel, appropriations professional staff roles don't come open often. He said, I encourage you to do it. So it was truly, I mean, in my opinion, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to work on appropriations. And while even at that time, appropriations was not necessarily what it used to be, it was still such an awesome place to be. And we had the opportunity to write a bill every year, which, a lot of staffers at that point in time in 2015 didn't have a chance to work. And Congress was definitely starting to function less and less. And, bills didn't get passed as often, especially individual bills. And so getting to work, passing, actually writing legislation, negotiating both with your Senate counterparts as well as, we would go and sit in negotiations with our House counterparts and negotiate line by line, comma by comma, and it was just an incredible opportunity. And we also, through the appropriations role, had the opportunity to travel the world and really understand through staff dells where those federal dollars were being spent, how they were functioning, how they were being used in food aid situations, in different foreign ag service programs that are employed throughout the world. And so we also traveled as well, trying to understand where our dollars were being spent. USDA and FDA dollars were being spent here domestically. So it was an incredible opportunity.
So how does the subcommittee professional staff work with the larger committee staff, the appropriations committee staff? How much interaction do you have, I guess, with the full committee?
With the full committee, everything had to be sort of blessed, but we really ran everything. We wrote our own bill. We did our own negotiating. Now, we knew, you knew what, like I said earlier, you knew what members on your subcommittee or the full committee had issues where and what their priority issues were. And so you had to navigate those things. And I would say only on very, very, very controversial items did you have to elevate and get the full committee staff engaged in negotiation, or would it go to what we called the four corners to negotiate, which is the ranking member and chair of the Senate and their counterparts on the House.
What would be an example of that?
Oh my gosh. The one that jumps out at me, which you're probably going to laugh at, is horse slaughter. Honestly, that's like really controversial.
It's very high. It's a very hot
an emotional
button issue.
But it was something that was one of the members was so passionate about that it always had to get kicked up to the four corners and the full committee. So, I mean, and there were much bigger things as well. That was something that was annually that we always had to elevate.
Chris Coons is very animated about.
I believe that might be correct.
Hey, look at us. We figured it out.
But no, so it changed every year. It depended on kind of what was going on. Whether it be policy riders that, since we were typically the only bill passing, a lot of
Gotta get it on somewhere.
The authorizers would come to us. That was also something that I learned. There weren't many people who had been authorizers and appropriators. And I learned, when I joined the Appropriations Committee, it was funny. They all told me, Rachel, there are three groups of people in Washington, D.C. There are Democrats, there are Republicans, and there are appropriators. And so, you really learned how the mindset is so different from an appropriator and how you get things done versus that authorizer. And that interaction with that authorizing committee and implementing some of the mandatory programs that required funding, or just the authorized programs, different things. So it was really eye-opening and a lot of fun.
Well, with appropriations, and you're talking about appropriators, and the appropriations folks are usually the targets for a lot of government affairs professionals. Now, did that sort of lobbying attention translate down to the staff, or how does that work exactly?
Elaborate a little bit more. What do you mean?
Lots of interest from lobbying groups.
Oh, yes.
Do they lobby staff just as much as they lobby the members?
More. It's really interesting. Once I became an appropriator, I really understood that so much gets done through appropriations, and so that's where everyone would come. And while prior to that, my world had always just been the Ag Committee and the Farm Bill, and that was how things rolled in the ag space. But what I didn't understand is, if you want to get the attention or do something, and it's not a Farm Bill year, and you're not going to be able to pass just some random bill, you're going to an appropriator, and you are trying to get what you need done. And also, if you need to have oversight authority over someone in an agency, they listen to the people who fund them. So, it's really important. I mean, it was really a ton of oversight work between bills. Obviously, when you weren't writing, you were staying engaged with all the agency staff, both their budget staff, but also their leadership, ensuring that things are being implemented the correct way according to Congress's wishes and intent, and ensuring things flowed correctly, and we got what we needed.
Was there how different was it to be a professional unprofessional committee staff with the Republicans being in the majority as opposed to your earlier, more limited experience, obviously in the Ag Committee? When the Republicans were in the minority?
It's really interesting. And my experience, I had a unique experience, I think, and only because I was on the Ag Subcommittee in the Senate, because it was the 100% opposite in the House. And it still is, and it still kind of functions to this day like this. We were so bipartisan on the Ag Subcommittee. There were issues that always, like I said, had to necessarily be elevated because it was a hot topic that, the staff level could not or was not able to negotiate on or budge on, and it had to be elevated. But we did not, in the Senate Ag Subcommittee, we did not put a comment in that bill without full agreement on both sides. And it happened totally oppositely in the House. Whoever was in the majority on the Ag Subcommittee in the House, they wrote the entire bill, and at markup, or right before markup, the minority got to see it. So we did everything together. So we had an incredible working relationship, and things, I think because we also recognize the fact that we weren't always going to be in the majority, and so when we were in the minority, they treated us the same way. So we had a great setup in our subcommittee in particular. But I wish things would work more like that. Because I think we got so much done because we worked in such a bipartisan manner, but unfortunately, it was rare.
Well, tell me about the members that you worked with when you were on the subcommittee. It was Jerry Moran from Kansas and John Hoven from North Dakota.
I was only there on the subcommittee for a brief time with Senator Hoven. I had a lot more interaction with Senator Moran, and I really, he's so quirky, but I really enjoyed him. He really cared, and he wanted to be engaged, and he wanted to learn, and he wanted you to come brief him. But I really feel fortunate to have gotten the opportunity to work for Senator Cochran because he was such a statesman and did so much for his state and for the country in the Southeast. And getting to work and be one of his staffers, even though, I didn't have as much interaction with him as I did our subcommittee chair. I really feel fortunate to have gotten to work and interact with him.
And that would have been sort of in his
last
final
years,
day, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, because I remember following that, it was a Republican primary.
Yes.
Chris McDaniel, I think.
Yes. Yes.
So tell me about your decision to step away from the Senate in Washington and come all the way back here to Georgia.
Well, to be honest with you, it was really hard because I loved my job, if you can't tell.
I can tell.
I had the best time. I was on the Hill for 7.5 years, and they were incredible years. And I loved ag policy. I mean, that was my space. But when I got married, I learned that compromise was important. And so I actually had the dean of the College of Ag called me and said, "Hey, I want to offer you a job to come work for me." And so, my husband and I talked about it a lot, and we decided that I would probably have stayed on the Hill forever, potentially, because I loved it so much. But we wanted to move back down south before we had kids and be close to our family, and so we jumped.
Oh, so he's from Georgia as well?
He's actually from Florida, but he wanted to move back down south. So his mom is originally from Georgia.
Okay. Well,
yeah, so he had ties.
That's all right then.
He had ties. But yes, so we moved back in 2017, and I stayed in the ag space and got to still, maintain my network and connections in D.C. through various avenues, and while not on the lobbying side necessarily, still just dabbling and doing different things. But, it was hard to leave, but I feel like I had 7.5 great years.
Well, and not everybody fights off Potomac fever as successfully as you did. But how did that experience working in the Senate and the committees, how did that experience translate into the position here at UGA?
Well, I think what has helped me really in all of the roles since leaving DC, everything that we do is impacted by federal legislation. And a lot of people, I would say actually the very vast majority of people don't really understand how the sausage is made. And so
for better and for worse?
Yeah, that is true. But it has really helped me to navigate, because all the things I have done have been impacted, and I am able to help advise my boss or whomever I work for on how best to navigate those things. And so that has really helped. And I would say, honestly, on a different kind of level, the network that I have had and made in DC, has been really life-changing in a lot of ways, because, all of the jobs that I have been able to have been because of the network that I have. And I've been very, very blessed in that respect, because it's always been, really someone coming to me and saying, "Hey, would you want to come work for me?" And, through all the different connections or, however, The current place I'm working, it was because we met at a dinner in D.C. When I was still on the Hill back in 2015. And so,
Oh, wow.
and he called and said, hey, would you want to come work for me? So the network is priceless in a lot of ways. And so that I've carried with me and tried to maintain to the best of my ability and continue to build.
Now, obviously, in this position at UGA, you reported to the dean, but were there instances, like, for example, with the Farm Bill, that where you would have worked with government relations with Toby Carr, and I guess it would have been Carly at the time, Carly McCallie, on how that money would come to UGA.
Yes, a ton of interaction. So we actually, while I was here, we were able to secure funding for poultry research and establish kind of a joint partnership to do for the ARS lab here in Athens to work with the Poultry Science Department. So that was an appropriation that we got in the Ag Approps bill in D.C. And then we also recreated that again for whitefly research. So we did that as well. And that has, they continue to kind of build upon that. And then we did that. Now I'm in the peanut industry. We've done that as well for aflatoxin research and for nutrition research for peanuts. Kind of that same mechanism through appropriations we've been able to recreate. But yes, I mean, and then, on the state side of things, when I was able to work on things like how, whether it be funding for facilities or, the hemp program that was really hot back in, 2019, 2020, I guess was the big legislative year for that. But so, it was a little bit of everything. But yes, I would say I was able to definitely help navigate some of that.
So tell me, you spent most of your career so far in the legislative world. How did you become a political appointee in the executive branch? How did that come about?
Well, it was really an opportunity where I think I had sort of that expertise and it just timing was right, really, more or less. And, I had briefly interacted with now Chancellor Perdue, but Sonny Perdue at the time when he was secretary. But, and I had brief crossings with him when I'd worked for Senator Perdue.
Sure.
In those early months with him. But I'd not really had a relationship prior to that with him, and so he had to get to know me a little bit. But I will say that the White House clearance process took a long time, so I would have been there longer had that clearance and processing gone quicker. But it was an incredible opportunity because it was kind of this kind of collision of all of my worlds in a lot of ways, and I got to be in Georgia and interact with all of the Georgia farmers and help them and utilize my policy knowledge. And, we would do things like, we were still trying at that point, even in 2020, fall of 2020, to still dole out the Hurricane Michael money, which is crazy to think about because all the red tape and all of that. And
which I'm sure we're about to go through again with Helene and
I know.
The other one that came
the
right
cumbersome bureaucracies of federal funding, yes. And so, it was things like being able to bring down DC staff and communicate with them in a way that they understood to, maybe tweak some things and how we could deliver things more efficiently or, whatever it was. But definitely I got to use a lot of my policy knowledge from my past life.
Well, for those who are unfamiliar, namely the person you're talking to, what does the FSA do?
So the FSA really has sort of, and I would really simplify it into kind of two buckets. And so they make farm loans.
Right.
And then they also administer farm programs. So they have offices in, now it's not every county, but they have, over 60 offices across the state. And they're the face of the federal government for so many people in rural America. And they dole out all of the, Title I commodity program money, they interact with NRCS on some of the conservation programs and different things like that. But they are really that face administering those Farm Bill programs, plus that loan side of things for growers. And now it's really expanded into urban agriculture and different things like that.
So as you mentioned, you were only there for a brief time, and of course during 2020, which was
another layer of complexity.
a unique time. So how much was disrupted, I guess, by the COVID-19 pandemic?
I would say a lot in a way. However, FSA was expected to be there no matter what. And, I know that there were people, I didn't come in until August of 2020, so a lot of it had happened prior to us. We were still functioning to a degree under a lot of the rules. However, at the beginning, prior to me getting there, I'd heard stories. They had set up a folding table in their parking lot, and they were servicing farmers in the parking lot because, it was critical that they were able to get their financing or money, what they needed. And so, they were there no matter what. So I would say it was disrupted, but it wasn't in a way as well.
Well, tell me about the transition process. Obviously, you're a political appointee, but you're working day to day. What was the transition process like from the Trump administration to the Biden administration, and what was your role in that? So
really and truly what they tell, appointees like me, and I don't know how necessarily it would happen for, DC appointees, but we were communicated with pretty heavily over that last month, and we were told your office has to be cleared out and you have to have a letter of resignation ready on X date, and that was it. There was no sort of transitioning anyone into the next thing. Because a lot of times in the years of a change of administration, there's a lot of times a significant gap because of just getting that next administration in and then that process. And it was not a Senate confirmed process, so you would think it goes faster, but it still lags.
Right. I guess a lot of it then falls to the professional civil servants who
it does. So
there.
They appoint an interim, and so they are someone typically who has been there for years and can maintain in between.
Well, tell me about the peanut world.
So it is a lot of fun. I have just been so blessed in my career to always work in ag, and this is the first job I've ever had that is in the private sector. And
that was one of my questions about how that's different.
Yes, it's very different. And I would say in so many ways it's so refreshing because obviously we don't have a lot of bureaucracy. But it's a lot of fun, and I learn something new every day, and I get to interact with such incredible people. And yet, what's been so incredible, I think, about the path of my career is, the people I work with now, I actually met back in 2010, 2011 when I worked for Senator Chambliss in my roles back then. And so, it's really incredible kind of how it's come full circle. I'm serving as chair of the American Peanut Shellers Association this year, and he actually just retired, but our longtime executive director, I'll never forget, I would host him for meetings in Senator Chambliss's office often during that process of the 2014 Farm Bill. So it's just, my network really, I would say, once again, has just been incredibly priceless, and I've been so fortunate because the ag community is just made up of really, really incredible people. But the peanut industry is a lot of fun. It's really, really small compared to a lot of commodities. Georgia produces over 50% of the U.S. production of peanuts, so we're obviously a very big state. But I actually uniquely work for a cooperative style company, so we are fairly new. We were just formed in 2014, we shell peanuts and do peanut oil, but we started shelling in 2016. And we actually are owned by our growers. So now we have almost 500 grower owners. and we supply all the major manufacturers of candy and snack nut and peanut butter domestically. So everything you would eat, any peanut butter, any peanut M&M, you name it, we'll have some of our peanuts. But we also export to over 30 countries around the world. So it's been a lot of fun to meet buyers. In my role, you name it. I'm headed to China next month. So
I was just going to say, are there regions, are there countries that consume more peanuts than others?
Yes, but I would say we are a big supplier, but we are not the biggest. There's some of the African countries are really big producers. China's really the biggest. India's a huge producer. Peanuts are grown everywhere and in a lot of ways consumed everywhere. Not in all forms though. So, we always try to increase consumption of peanuts and peanut products, especially, there's a lot of growth in peanut butter in Europe and different things like that. So we're involved in a lot of, some of the associations I'm involved in do a lot of work in, nutrition research and promotion and different things. So it's exciting. It's a great product to be able to promote and sell and interact for.
Well, folks, come for the Senate talk, stay for the peanuts.
That's right.
You learn something new every day. For people who are watching, maybe people like you who are starting their career out, what advice would you give to them about whether or not going into government service or working on the Hill is something that they should explore?
Well, anyone who will have ever, if you asked anybody I've ever talked to, they will tell you that I promote going to D.C. after college 100%. And that is my biggest advice for young people. And as I've gotten older, I've had a lot of college kids come to me and ask for advice. And, I always tell them, you don't have to stay there like I did. But getting that experience is priceless because so few people get that experience, and you can't go back and do it. If you go somewhere else, it's too hard to come back. And so, whether it's just an internship or spend a couple years on the Hill, I thought I was only going to be there 2 years and then go back to law school. And, so then you get the bug. But
You're still not a lawyer, though.
True.
There's still time for that, right?
But, it's one of those things where I think everyone should do it. I think every young person in some shape, form, or capacity should go get exposure, whether it's the House or the Senate, even if it's just a 4-week internship, understand how that works, and maybe you will get hooked.
What do you think, as we wrap up, what do you think some of the biggest misconceptions that the public may have about the Hill and how our government works?
These days there's a lot. I would say that when I was there, the intentions are really good, and I think people think that they're not, and I think people think that things happen behind closed doors and it's all bad, and there's hidden things in bills, and really there's not. And people, people's intentions are good, and they're trying to make this country a better place. And, when you don't understand how the sausage is made, sometimes it can seem scary or, secretive or whatever, you name it. But, really, I think everyone, we're trying to get to the same place. We just have different opinions on how to get there.
Well, Rachel, is there anything else? We've covered a lot of territory in the last hour or so. Is there anything else you'd like to record for posterity's sake?
I just feel fortunate to have had the opportunity to work in the Senate. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And getting to work for Senator Chambliss really, I will say it's been, 10 years since I left his office. And I will say I still am introduced both here in the state and in D.C. Whenever anybody introduces me to someone new, the first thing they say is, "Oh, she worked for Senator Chambliss." And that gives me enough credibility that it goes a long way, because it is so it carries a lot of weight. And
Says a lot.
I feel very fortunate that I got to work for him.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time to come all the way over here to campus, fight the traffic, fight the class changes. There's a lot more people here than when we were in school, which is a good problem to have.
That's
but
right.
Thank you so much on behalf of the Russell Library and everyone here at UGA.
Thank you for having me.